Good morning, everybody. This is Robert Newland. Thank you for being here. It's 11 o'clock, and we're going to give people that are maybe showing a little bit late a couple minutes before we begin. Hold tight, and thank you. Good morning, everybody. One more minute, and we should be ready to begin. Thank you. All right, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for being here. This is Robert Newland and series of webinars that we've called the Code the Human podcast series with Robert Newland. Today, we're going to be talking about MeToo and its impact in the workplace. And before I begin, and I even introduce the guest panel today, I want to tell you a story. A few months ago, I was invited to an event at the Chamber here in Orlando on a similar topic, and it was put together a friend of mine. Her name is Frances Rio. She has an amazing company. And I noticed that other than the speakers, most of the participants in the audience were women. And that troubled me because I think that this is a conversation that not just women, but men should be having. So I hope that in the audience today we have more men. If not, go grab somebody from the opposite sex and have them participate. So with that, I want to introduce three excellent guests that I have today. The first one is Carol Wick. She is a domestic violence expert and CEO and founder at Sharity. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me to be here.
Thank you for being here. The next one, also known, she hates that I say this, but she's also known as my better half, is Beatriz Newland. She's probably going to hate me after this call, and I'll pay for it. Beatriz Newland, or Bea, as we call her, she's an affirmative action expert, and she's Senior VP of Compliance here at the firm. Hello, Bea.
Good morning, Robert.
Yep, I'm going to get it later. And then lastly, we have Deborah Catalano. She's a labor attorney and a partner at Zimmerman, Kiser, Sutcliffe. She actually was one of the speakers in that event we did a few months ago. So she knows what I'm talking about. Good morning, Deborah.
Good morning.
All right. So a couple of fundamental housekeeping rules. First of all, we're being recorded. So if you need to share the webinar later, you're going to be able to do that. If you have any questions, just type them and we're going to look into them. If you have any issues in terms of connections or whatnot, just shoot me an email. And then lastly, if you see down here, Newland-Associates.com category news. This is where this podcast is going to reside. We want to tell you a little bit about our firm, our 20-second commercial. Newland Associates is an organization where we help our clients decode the human for business results. And we do this through expertise in talent acquisition, talent management, and HR advisory. We're very proud to be a shareholder of Career Partners International, one of the largest global organizations in executive coaching, leader development, and outplacement. And we're also very proud to be a certified partner for the Predictive Index. Now, instead of me telling you a whole lot more about the organization, what I want you to do in this slide, if you can hold your camera and put your phone to where it says scan me. Can everybody see my slide from the speakers? Is anybody seeing this slide?
No, not the scan me one. There it is.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So if you you take your camera out, you put it, just your camera, not an app, and you put it in front of where you see scan me. Do this for a second. You see what's going to happen. And we get everybody a moment to get their phones and do that. All right, and just point the camera at where it says scan me. And what you're going to get, like in my phone, in my case, I have an iPhone. It says open QR code in Safari. And when I open it, I can see in there that I can visit our website, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So instead of typing all that stuff that you see on the right, you're going to be able to do that. And just, keep tabs with us. We're trying to bring you a lot of really good content around talent management, talent strategy, talent acquisition. So with that, let's go back to the panel. And let me begin with Carol. Carol, talk to us about MeToo. How did it start? Where are we today? What prompted this? What accelerated it?
Well, MeToo is an interesting movement, and we had some previous women's rights types movements, specifically around first when the O.J. Simpson trial happened, and then around the Ray Rice video being released. And MeToo is different, though. I think the main difference is that we had celebrities speaking out about the sexual harassment, even in the case of Weinstein, alleged rape in the workplace. And we had a lot of women being able to come out and actually say that this is happening, it's very prevalent, and they are now empowered to be able to speak out. And I think a layer of the shame, the quiet, and the ability of people who were sexually harassing women in the workplace to get away with that has gone now with this movement. And I think the ability to not be isolated because of social media has helped the movement just take hold and continue to grow.
So let me ask you this. I'm putting up a slide. I hope everybody else can see it. And it's a study from Northeastern University. And basically what it says is that intimate partner homicides started, upticking again. If you look at the increase between 2014 and 2017, you look at, almost 1,900 people were killed by an intimate partner. And that is creeping up to over 2,200 in 2017. Do you see any correlation? And I know it's a hard question to ask, and we talked about it. You think there's any correlation between the MeToo movement and some kind of, since there's MeToo, now I'm going to further retaliate, or now I feel threatened by this? Is there a connection there in your expert opinion?
Well, we are seeing a significant increase in women being murdered. And in fact, in the United States, the number one cause of death of pregnant women is not preeclampsia and health-related issues. It's actually being murdered by their intimate partner. It's a really tragic that we're seeing that uptick, and significant uptick, not just here in the United States, but around the globe. And it's hard to say whether it has anything to do with women finally not being isolated as much anymore, but I think it has more to do with the fact that we're seeing more mass homicides. We're seeing a lot more gun violence. The number one weapon that women are killed with is a gun, and it's in their home. And but we are seeing that spill out into the workplace. And I think that if we don't do something, we see a lot of abusers that are starting to feel like they're losing control because women are entering the workplace, and it's now pretty much assumed that they're going to be working, and that in and of itself makes the situation more dangerous for the survivor because she has access to resources and access to people who might support her in that workplace.
So then what you're saying, if I heard you right, is that as there is more women going onto the workplace, that provides them the means to sort of address this challenge, and that may be then a concern for those abusers, and it may be causing some of this. Did I get that right?
Well, I think that, obviously the number one thing that prompts a homicide of a woman in a violent relationship is leaving. And so you have to have usually the economic means to be able to leave. And so there's a link there, definitely. I don't think that there's been any research that actually proves that the MeToo movement has then prompted. You can see, this is from 2014. So long before the MeToo movement, we were seeing a dramatic increase in homicides. And again, we're seeing most of that in gun violence. So what we're also seeing that this doesn't show that Anytown did research on is that the incident of mass shootings is also on the increase. So women are not dying alone anymore. They're actually dying, and the abusers are killing not just them. They're going into schools, they're going into workplaces, they're going into marketplaces, and we're seeing the number of homicides related to domestic violence abusers like Vegas, like Pulse, a lot of other, here in Florida there were several. We're seeing a huge number in the death toll around domestic violence that's not necessarily always attributed to intimate partner violence.
Okay, well, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm new at this, so guys, be tender with me. I want to conduct a poll on everybody in the audience, and the question is, do you know of anyone who has been in a relationship with their partner, has abused them? And the reason why we want to ask this is because then I want us to talk about, is this something that we want or can address in the workplace, right? So I'm going to let people answer. I hope you can see it on the screen, and we're getting an answers right now. I want to give it a couple more seconds, maybe another 20 seconds or so. All right, I'm going to close it, but right now it's basically 2/3 of you, 67%, are saying yes, 33% are saying no. So basically, at least on this audience, 2 out of 3 know somebody who's been in a relationship with their partner has abused them. And this is a question not just for Carol, but also talking a bit to Deborah. So everybody please chime in. How does this translate into the workplace? What are the consequences in terms of the organization, productivity? Could you end up with an active shooter situation in the workplace because of this? What do you want to share about that?
Well, I'll just jump in first and let Deborah then. I will say this, that if those of you that have answered that you don't know someone who's in an abusive relationship, you probably just haven't asked the question or known the warning signs. Oftentimes in the workplace, it doesn't look like what you would think. It's someone being late, someone getting lots of personal phone calls, maybe absenteeism, if they have uniforms being damaged and needing new uniforms, even the partner showing up a lot to pick them up, wanting them to come early, seeming very stressed. And when we calculate that in the effect that intimate partner violence has on employers, it's literally hundreds of millions of dollars in just about every community. I know I calculated it here in Central Florida, and it was $123 million that employers lost every year just in lost productivity, absenteeism, and medical costs related to intimate partner violence in the workplace. And it does absolutely increase the chances of an active shooter in the workplace if you're not addressing it, identifying it, and providing support to those people.
Thank you. And Deborah, I want to go to you to sort of address the component of what are we seeing from an attorney standpoint, employment and labor. Here's a slide that I want to share with the audience. It's from the EEOC, from the acting chair. And if you look at the data from fiscal year 2018 versus 2017, you have a 50% increase in sexual harassment suits by the agency. And if you look at the last bullet, I'm not going to read through all of it. You all can read it as we talk. But you're talking about $70 million recovered to victims of sexual harassment in 2018 versus 47.5. So I guess the first question I have for you is, have you seen an uptick, if you will, on claims, grievances of sexual harassment, with the understanding that not all of them are, have basis, but do you see through fellow attorneys or in your practice more conversation around people saying, ever since this happened, there is more grievances around this?
Yes, Robert, I have seen that. And I thank you for this slide because I think that is helpful for the audience to know this. And just to give some background, I've been representing employers for the past 20 years. So all of my vantage point would be, what is my client calling me about? And whether it's an internal issue or a lawsuit, what I've seen over the last several years has been an increase in employers contacting my office prior to a lawsuit being filed, because either an internal claim has been raised by a female employee saying, I've been harassed, or interestingly enough, sometimes I get my client calls me advising that other employees have actually reported what they perceived has been harassment toward a female employee by others, and they weren't necessarily protected. So there are opportunities for employers to address this so that someone's job is preserved. And training in the workplace for employers, training managers is different than training employees, because managers do need to be educated as to what signs to look for. So we've seen some positive steps with the sort of the rise of this conversation. It has prioritized for employers the need to take this seriously before someone is terminated or chooses to leave because the conditions have gotten so bad that they can't take the alleged harassment anymore. So, and the other thing I'd like to say, as it related to the violence in the workplace, it is customary for employers to have policies covering that. What has occurred increasingly in the last few years is that states have actually enacted specific statutes that require employers to provide leave for domestic abuse issues, and educating employers and managers within employers as to that aspect of what a state requires an employer to do. That there has been a delay between the enactment of the statute and then employers becoming aware that employees have the right to take leave in Florida, up to 3 days of leave, so that they can testify in their own hearings, so that they can address whether they need to relocate. So over time, as these issues rise to the surface and become part of our statutes, then the culture of the employer is changing. And so I would say that this has been a positive movement in the right direction.
So you said something that I found really interesting, and I don't want to presume that in the audience everybody's familiar with that, and I think it could be really insightful. Could you go a little bit deeper and explain what you think would be the difference, say, providing training for, say, employees versus managers and supervisors?
Oh, okay, and that actually is a great question. And that would actually affect not just the discussion about sexual harassment, but the violence in the workplace
Sure.
issue. Because when you think, most of the allegations I hear that relate to violence in the workplace is not an active shooter. It actually stems from relationships that employees have that over time the employer comes to understand that there is abuse and perhaps injunctions that have been put in place. And often employers find out about this, again, not through the employee, but through a friend of the employee. And so to your question, Robert, as to what the difference would be in training supervisors versus other employees, supervisors have an obligation to make sure that employers comply with the law. So I would take the position that supervisors should be trained specifically in not only state laws, but federal laws that relate to what is the state and federal requirement of an employer. As it relates to this issue about violence in the workplace, it would not surprise me that something like 80% of managers have no idea that there is actually a state statute on that. And so as I would be, someone like me, a defense attorney, would be asked to come in and provide training to supervisors, I would walk them through, here's what the state law says. Here, and to Carol's point, here's what this looks like in the workplace. And it isn't necessarily someone, coming through the front door with a gun. It is actually much more subtle than that. And it is absenteeism. It is someone whose performance decreases over time, who was formerly a good employee, but it's also substance abuse and what is driving that. So there's a myriad of things that employers can do, which would include things like an employee assistance, EAP programs, and actually providing those kinds of resources. And the other issue I would say is employers, supervisors need to know when these things start manifesting in the workplace and that the employer comes to understand that there is this kind of stress from a personal relationship affecting an employee, that actually triggers the right to have FMLA leave, family and medical leave, under federal law, and possibly even a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So managers, if all an employer did was provide a handbook, no employer would be in a position to actually comply with federal and state law and discharge its duties.
The handbook alone won't do it. And I think something interesting that I learned, as you know, and some of the audience does not know, I used to work in the U.S. Department of Labor investigating basically cases of discrimination many years ago in a galaxy far away. But quite often, I'm not going to say most cases, but it wasn't uncommon for somebody to come into the agency and say, I was fired because of, say, my gender or veteran status, etc. And one of the things that I think people need to understand, especially in the audience, if you're not a leader in HR, but also if you're here because you're generally interested in the topic, just because you belong to what we call a protected group doesn't mean that if an action is taken against that person or you, it is because you belong to that protected group. It does happen. And I imagine you go through those discussions also with your clients where they may see, well, we have to fire this person and she was, a female, and they may be concerned that it may be perceived that that was a reason why, right?
Yes, actually, many of my clients contact me proactively when they want to understand what else should they be looking at when they go to terminate or put someone on probation or a performance improvement plan. And that actually, to me, is a great opportunity to tell your client, okay, what does this look like? How have you treated men in the past in a similar position, and what is different about this as it relates to females? And so certainly the process for employers should be the same, and there should be, when you go to compare recent or terminations in the last 2 years, my clients need to be in a position to demonstrate that the process acted out consistently for both men and women.
Well, maybe in the future we can do, I love this topic. Maybe we can do a webinar on disparate treatment versus disparate impact and the theories of discrimination, which I think is always a good topic to understand for employers so that they don't end up not uncovering discrimination, sometimes thinking there is discrimination when there isn't. We recently had a situation where we do independent workplace investigations, as you know, as part of our practice, and we had a client where they thought that a supervisor was creating a hostile work environment for a person because of this person's status. And what we learned is that the alleged accused was basically this way with everybody. Didn't make him a good leader, but it was not based on somebody being a woman or veteran or disabled or minority, etc. Well, and I want to move on a little bit. Before we do, I want to do another poll right here. I want to get feedback, and I'm going to launch it. And it is basically, pick one of these. When you think about the most common grievances on gender discrimination, what are they about? And again, I'm not talking about your workplace. I'm talking the stuff you hear. Is it employment, meaning hiring? Is it because of firing or termination? Is it in opportunities for promotion? Is it harassment, hostile work environment, or is it pay and benefits? So let's launch that one and see what people say. I'm curious about that one. What do you think is going to be, Deborah?
Well, I tell you what my answer is. It would be termination. And because that is what I often get calls about from employers, is prior to terminating an individual, they want to ensure that they've got the business case that makes sense and that they've evaluated all of the factors.
Yeah, and I would be with you there. What's really weird out right now is that everybody's sitting down, I hope, because 45% are saying pay and benefits, 38% are saying harassment, hostile work environment, 28% are saying promotion, 16% termination, and 9% hiring, which it sort of tells me that we're probably, from a case standpoint, because I'm with you, I would think the same thing. We probably see what people may see more of, but maybe it's not where their heart is at. And I don't know if this is necessarily a grievance, or perhaps is being interpreted by some as where they see the major issues being at. So it's really, really interesting. And, not that it wasn't planned this way, that 47% would be pay and benefits, but I'm going to have to go to my better half, Beatriz or Bea, because we're going to talk about, the wage gap a little bit. And Bea, before we do, I want to share a study from PayScale. They surveyed about 1.8 million people between 2017 and 2019, and they found that the pay gap decreased by about 5 cents since 2015, but women still make about 80 cents on the dollar versus men. And then if you look at the second paragraph, it's really, really interesting. The biggest issue in wage gap is that women are less likely to hold high-level, high-paying jobs as compared to men, and there may be structural barriers that keep women from advancing in the workplace. That is really, really, interesting to me. And of course, Bea, as a consultant, the reason why she is here, she does a lot of statistical analysis for our clients to understand statistically significant differences in wage by gender, minority groups, etc. So I wanted to ask you, Bea, how does this comport with your experience and what you see in the marketplace? Is this pretty spot on?
Thanks, Robert. I would have to say it is actually pretty accurate in that sense. The analysis I've been performing lately do reflect that kind of a difference, especially like it says there in upper management positions, where would females get into a job where they can no longer get the same pay as men. And it's also interesting, with not here, but that you may find, for example, African American women tend to be a little lower than that 79 cents uh, for a dollar that the men earn.
So what you're saying is that you see the gap, but that when you break it down within gender by race, women of color, African American women, have a bigger gap. Is that what I heard right?
Right.
Okay,
It
and
shows
and and your work takes you to interact a lot with clients that are dealing with agencies like the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, which is the agency that investigates affirmative action compliance and a bit of the EOC. Um, are you seeing them shifting towards more pay equity enforcement, or has nothing really changed?
They have been giving it more focus. When you look at audits that they've been doing, it is uh, up front and center now, and given they're also changing uh, the scheduling later that they send for asking for more detailed compensation information for your workforce. So they will sit and do these kinds of analysis on their end and look deeper into it.
Well, it does sound when we read the statement from the acting chair of the EOC. I mean, she makes reference to the MeToo movement. So it seems as though they have the ear of the country when it comes to that. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but when we're talking about page gaps, the simple, the short, well, not simple, the short version. How do you analyze if there are wage gaps? Well, how do you do that voodoo science, which I'm sure is not voodoo science? How do you do that?
Well, when we analyze compensation, we typically start with basically a simple analysis of mean and average, uh, which will look at what our differences are, let's say in this case, between men and women. And
Hmm.
we'll look at job titles or by job families, or we may also
Okay.
look by salary grades. And we're going to see and try and find if there are meaningful differences between them. Now, when we do find that there are meaningful differences, we want to take a deeper look. So we're going to maybe doing regression analysis, multiple regression, where we're going to be looking at more specific factors, such as your job title. Within your job title, well, how long have you been with the company? How long have you been at your job?
Hmm.
Um, what is your education? Uh, how is your performance rating? So we want to make sure we can identify legitimate factors that explain this gap. So
Okay.
and when we don't, then the only reason left there is going to be, well, then it's got to be gender.
So basically, what you're saying, for example, is a male is making more than a female, but if they've been on the job with similar experience, the same amount of time, same education, it's just a very simple example, is going to be very hard to explain the difference in compensation.
Correct.
Okay. And from a very practical standpoint, then if that happens in an organization, how do they close the gap? Do they need to close the gap? How do they do that?
Well, we work with companies in that sense, looking at when the company is doing their performance evaluation
Okay.
and their performance review every year. They're going to, from there, go to salary increases. So we're going to be looking then at what's their compensation base. How much are you allocating? And then we can do something a bit different this time around. Let's see if you can allocate that money going towards those gaps so that we can significantly reduce any statistical differences that there may be, or if if at that point we're able to close the gap completely, that'd be great. But typically, it'll take a little more than just 1 year of analysis. It may take 2 or 3 years to be able to close that gap. Um,
Robert, could I add a few points to this that would tie in nicely with Beatriz's comments? Okay.
Please do.
Well, so the EEOC has come out with what they're referring to, and I'm sure Beatriz will be using this in her to discharge her role with employers, but there is now a new guidance for the EEO1 reporting. And so the deadline for the application of this new guidance by employers who are covered by it will be September of this year. So employers will have to become much more diligent in responding to the requirements to provide data on pay. Historically, as an employment lawyer for businesses, I do not see businesses looking at that issue with sufficient, with the lens that they should, because they're so busy reacting to other issues, perhaps the internal investigations, the lawsuits. But this requires proactive thinking to bring the discussion about the gender pay gap to the forefront. Audits, in my opinion, are necessary for employers of most sizes at this point, certainly employees where they have the employee count of 15 or more, which is most employers. And I think that from an equal pay standpoint, there are 2 statutes that are relevant for this claim by employees, and it's the Equal Pay Act as well as Title VII. There are different standards in both of those, but an audit could be used as a defense by employers to both of those claims. And that is what I would recommend to employers, is in addition to the training they have to do of managers, that they need to be proactive in bringing in someone to analyze, an outside individual to analyze what are we paying our people, men and women, and among the pay grade or scale, however they put that line in the sand, and ultimately are employers in a position where they can substantiate there is a business case for the differential in pay. And I don't want to get too technical for our audience, Robert, but there is a recent lawsuit, 11th Circuit Court of Appeal opinion, and that's the appellate level in the jurisdiction we're in. So the 11th Circuit covers Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. The 11th Circuit last year sent a case back to the district court, and it was a female arbitration manager who said that from the time she was given the arbitration manager title, that she was paid unfairly. And there were experts brought in. And if you read the opinion, it is amazing to me that the employer actually, while for the 6 years that this individual was on the payroll, that she was paid far less than the male counterpart who preceded her. And so she was able to provide that information. And believe it or not, HR did some internal reviews while she was employed, and management did not take HR's analysis And eventually they just ignored what the external evidence was clearly showing. And ultimately she had to sue, and at the district court level, that case did not do well. It was reversed on appeal, and it was settled because the opinion by the 11th Circuit said that there is sufficient evidence to show that the employer did not take into consideration, did not address HR's complaints about what seemed to be pay gaps. So there is a current excellent opinion. If I was a plaintiff's lawyer, an employee lawyer, that is the opinion that I would structure my cases on. And it's also, as a defense attorney, that's the case I would tell my employer clients, you need to be able to demonstrate the business case for a pay differential between genders.
Deborah, thank you. That is a very, very valid point. During my work with affirmative action and doing analysis, we do come to the position that we perform the analysis and we discuss with HR and compensation, but then no action is taken. They shelve that. Okay, we did the analysis.
And I would say
put it on the shelf and move on to other requirements. But you bring that up, and it's very important because you have to take action. And once you've identified where you can, I mean, what's keeping you?
Well, isn't it the case, Bea, that when this explodes, and Deborah, you probably see the same, is when this ends up in court, management goes to HR and they say, well, why didn't you tell me? And you have to tell, I've been telling you. You just haven't been listening. And that can be unfortunate sometimes. Time is betraying us a little, so I want to go to another poll. And as you can see by what Bea is discussing and Deborah, analyzing wage gap is important. So I want to run a poll by everybody, which is pretty straightforward. Have you done any kind of statistical analysis to uncover pay gaps by gender within jobs? And I say within jobs, generally speaking, but it's not looking about the average, wage of males versus females across the whole organization. That would be a bit too broad. So I just want to launch that poll and have you done it? Have you only done like mean, median, say average analysis, or you haven't at all? I'm just curious where we're at, in the marketplace as it relates to that. And I would argue that, and Deborah, what you mentioned, I would say that we tend to be, as consultants that do a lot of work around EO and affirmative action, a bit more on the forefront, because a lot of our clients for whom we do this kind of work are federal contractors that have to comply with affirmative action, and obviously you need to do those analyses there. But it seems as though most other employers, to your case, aren't really doing it. And I think as the world is changing, they expose themselves to higher risk. And I want to give the response that we have. I'm going to close the poll. Gone. And we have 62% haven't performed the analysis. About a quarter, 24%, they've only done mean or median analysis. Only 15% have performed the more in-depth statistical analysis. And just very good information to know. And I think for those of you who've not done any kind of analysis, I think it may be time for you to dive a little bit deeper. Now it's 10:45. We just have a few more minutes left, and I don't want to end after our time. But if each one of you wanted to make a recommendation to the audience regarding MeToo and its impact in the workplace, you want to, what would that be? Going back to Carol and Deborah and then Bea.
Well, I think we've kind of covered a couple different things between, MeToo, which is really sexual harassment, and then, of course, workplace violence and domestic violence. I think the most important thing for employers to do is to not say, oh, they're just making this up, and to actively dismiss complaints that female employees have in the workplace, and they need to create a process that allows women to come forward and and report what's happening early so that it doesn't end up in litigation, it doesn't end up in a workplace shooting. If you have an environment where you have trained employees, you have people who are safe people for them to go and talk to disclose that they are in a violent relationship, or that a coworker is acting inappropriately, or that they have an injunction against another coworker. If you have that kind of open environment, you're going to see less litigation and less problems, and a safer, healthier workplace. I think we just have to get away from the old environment and culture where women are just dismissed, that they're making things up and they're trying to silence. That era is gone, and we're not going back there.
I hope not. Deborah?
Using that 11th Circuit case as a good launching off point for most employers, I would tell HR as well as senior management that they are going to be the ones who are in depositions, and the discovery as to whether or not there is a pay gap and the reasons for it rests with them. And my recommendation to employers would be to take that seriously, because you're going to be the one, someone's going to have to provide that information in the event of a lawsuit. And it's better to get the information, understand where the weaknesses are now, and see what you can do with that information. There's no, you can have a pay gap provided that it's based on a legitimate reason, such as a seniority system, a merit system, a production system. So I find that it's the incentive that most employers need is when they understand that they're going to be the ones deposed, that it actually increases the level of priority that the process is given.
Thank you. Bea?
I would say to every employer, stay abreast of those compensation laws that affect your business. It is very important that you're informed. Train your hiring managers and HR manager on compensation. Anybody who has a decision-making uh, position in the company needs to know why they're doing this. Train them, and then also make yourself audits, do them, and once you perform them and found out whatever gaps it might identify, take action. The time is now to take action on those, definitely.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to add a few things as we close. First, on the issue of domestic violence, the possibility of something happening in the workplace gets manifested, like Carol said, in so many different ways. Certainly, we want to address it as a good corporate citizen. It is the right thing to do. Period. End of story. But Carol presented very clearly that there is also a business aspect to this. There's a loss of business that happens when domestic violence gets either manifested in the workplace, or we have people in the workplace that are being victims of domestic violence, and we are now providing the means for them to find a way out of that. I think I learned a lot from Deborah, particularly the discussion around the relevance of how we train managers in terms of what to do versus employees, and have to be very active with that. And it's not just a lightweight training, but they really need to understand the different federal and state laws that affect them, because if they're making decisions with employees, and they are every moment of the day, they need to understand those. And from Deborah and also from Bea, the wage gap is real, and it's being addressed, but certainly we're seeing different agencies putting more teeth behind and more focus behind wage gap analysis. So it's something that we need to address. I do want to say for my part, and for Glenn, Joe, Kurt, Rolando, Ronald, and Troy, which are the other guys that are on the call. So if we could, clap our hands, we would. I wish there was more of us on this call. I appreciate each one, every one of you for being on the call. I hope next time we do a call like this, we could have an equal representation of gender as we have overall in our society, because the day that happens, I know that we are addressing this the right way. So I want to thank everybody for being here. And I want to close, in addition to saying thank you to the panelists, I want to ask you to take your phones out again and get to where it says scan me. This is going to be a little bit different. If you, everybody get your phones. Come on, don't be lazy. There you go. Yeah, I have hidden cameras. I can see all of you. So when you go to scan me there, you're going to get access to a talent management diagnostic quiz. I appreciate if you can take 3 minutes and complete it. The quiz is going to help you understand where you are with some fundamentals around HR and talent management. Once you complete it, we're going to share the aggregate results with everybody that attended today. And I say thank you for taking the talent management diagnostic quiz. We're going to offer you a complimentary job assessment, which you can utilize for your next hire at no cost to you. That means the job assessment with the additional assessments, behavioral assessments from the predictive index as a courtesy to you. And with that, again, I want to thank Carol, Deborah, Beatriz for being here today. And stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be happening at the end of August. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.